South Carolina. She used to tell a story in South Carolina saying that quilts were used on the Underground Railroad. It's not been proven, but a lot of people believe that quilts, if let's say a triangle pointed to the north, it lets you know that's the direction to go into. None of these quilts have been found, and there's a book actually e-published, which means you can get it off the internet, called The Underground Railroad Quilt Code. And Lee Fellner actually did a lot of research behind that, and you might want to look that up and see what you believe in, because there are two distinctly different camps, and one can't believe one thing and one can't believe the other, and it's up to you to read about it and see which do you believe. Do you believe that they were used on the Underground Railroad to help people escape, or do you believe that they weren't? It's up to you. There's another school of thought that believes that when slaves came here from Africa, they brought with them a lot of their artistic values in their hearts and in their heads. And they remembered everything that they had seen in Africa as far as the textiles and the squares and the triangles. And I actually have a big piece of kente cloth, which is the strips that are woven and then sewn together. Here it is. This is an example of strip piecing, African strip piecing, and this is called kente cloth. And as I said, long pieces were woven and then sewn together. And people believe that when African Americans came over, they never forgot this, really. And when they began to make quilts, they remembered their African heritage and made strip-pieced quilts. This is an example of a quilt that has strip piecing in it that is old, and it will be argued that this is a traditional African American quilt. And it's considered a traditional African American quilt because the squares are not the exact same size, and the quilting is not as even, and the strips are wide and narrow and not exactly measured. This would be an example of strip piecing, down on this side and on this side. Personally, I don't know where I sit on that. I don't know where I did think I believed one certain thing, then I started reading again. There are several authors who have worked out about that. Eli Leon is one. He's a collector, so his books are not published. They're guides that went with exhibits. Eli Leon, Maud Wallman is also one who, this is last movie cry. Signs and Symbols is Maud Wallman. She is another one who believes that there's a distinct African presence in African American quilts that can be linked. And Eli Leon, I think, does the best job of linking them and showing the African fabric versus the American quilt, the African American quilt, and how they will be linked together. There are people now documenting quilts. Roland Freeman. If there's no other African American quilt book to get, I say The Communion of the Spirits is probably the best book to get. Communion of the Spirits is a book of writing and photographs about African American quilters, quilt collectors, and preservers, and their stories. And Roland Freeman is actually a folklorist, but his niche at this point in time is quilting and documenting quilts. And he actually has a big exhibit right now in Washington, D.C. One other big controversy, and then I'm going to finish it out, is, there's another book, that deals with African American history and quilting, and that is Always There, The African American Presence in American Quilts. This book is probably the go-to book for African American quilters. However, this was another book that was printed in conjunction with an exhibit and will never be republished. I spoke with the author, and she told me because it came out with an exhibit, it will never be republished. So you try to get everything on eBay. This is what I try to get on. I got actually this one on eBay. and another Eli Leon's books I also got on eBay. There's Celesta Benberry, was our actual quilt historian, African American quilt historian. She just passed away 2 years ago. But she was kind of the go-to person for, this is actually her book, Always There is her book, and then she went on to document other quilts in books. She passed the torch on to Kyra Hicks, who published Black Threads. And now, because quilting is not just for the bed anymore, as you see by my quilts on the wall, there is a new niche in quilting, contemporary quilting, art quilting, and that's when you really can do whatever you want. You don't have to use triangles or squares. Sometimes people don't even sew. There's a lot of writing, journaling, capturing your feelings if you want to do people. That's new, and that's called contemporary quilting or art quilting. And there's Carolyn Mazlumi is one of the people who leads this movement. And she founded the Women of Color Quilters Network. So this is her book, Spirits of the Cloth, and she has another one, Threads of Faith, and she also did one on jazz and the blues. And finally, there's one more big thing that you probably heard about and you're waiting for me to mention, and that's the quilt of Gee's Bend, Alabama. Gee's Bend, Alabama was a small rural community that was first put on the map. I can't really say put on the map, but they were first talked about in the 30s because they were one of the poorest communities in the United States during the Depression and in the years following the Depression, and they were targeted by Theodore Roosevelt. So Gee's Bend is famous in that we have pictures of Gee's Bend from the 30s. Then Gee's Bend was rediscovered in the 60s during the Civil Rights Movement when people went there to register them to vote, and that's when people saw these beautiful quilts that these ladies made and said, you should sell them. And they got in contact with high-end department stores like Barwood Teller. At the time, I believe Sears gave them a contract also, and they had a quilters collective, and they made quilts and sold them to these stores. Then Gee's Bend recently came under the light again when a quilt collector he's not a quilt collector, his name is Matt Arnett, he's a vernacular folk collector. And he collects all kinds of, he calls it vernacular folk art, southern art. Collected a couple of these quilts and thought they were so beautiful there should be an exhibit. And he exhibited them at the High Museum of Art in New York. He exhibited them in Houston. And it started with just the two museums, but they've since traveled all over. They've come to Atlanta, they went to Orlando, they've gone to Philadelphia, and there's been a firestorm of controversy in that people feel that the quilters are not getting their just rewards for all the marketing and all the things that have been made out of these quilts. They have Gee's Bend rugs, their Gee's Bend ties, silk scarves. The United States Post Office put out a postal stamp. Kathy Ireland picked up the quilts for collection. And a few of the quilters actually filed a lawsuit, which the details have not really been made that public. They settled out of court before the case went to trial. They settled. And so consequently, we really don't know much about the settlement. This is just literally the tip of the iceberg, but I know that you are anxious to go back and start making your own quilts with the little bit I showed you. I want you to remember, a quilt is what it looks like. If you see triangles and squares, then you can cut out triangles and squares and sew them together and make your own quilt. I have enjoyed speaking with you and I hope to hear from you about your own quilt. Thanks.